How's it going, everyone? This is my first video that I'm uploading on my channel, but today I'm going to be going over my top 10 favorite bodybuilding shows of all time. Before I get into that, just a quick little preview of what this channel is going to be about. If anybody has ever watched Mark's Max Muscle, Tominator, newer guys, so Project Bodybuilding, Jake Ultimate Fitness, very similar content to that. I'll be going over the current bodybuilding sphere, what's going on in modern day. And then also I'm going to be doing comparisons of different physiques from different eras. Mainly it'll for the most part, it's going to be everything 90s to now, because that's my favorite era. I really liked Lee Haney, but outside of that, everything before the 90s, before the Mass Monster era, I don't care for a whole lot. But it's mainly just going to be focused on that and a whole bunch of comparisons and just going over a whole bunch of things. I have a lot of ideas, and I'll get to them probably within the next few weeks. Coming in at number 10, for me at least, it's the 2009 Mr. Olympia. The main reason that I really like this show, and I like watching the highlights from it, I really like the lighting. I think that this, along with 2008, might be the best Olympia lighting out of any show in the modern day. It's just, I wish that nowadays they would do stuff like this because, well, my friends and I watched the 2023 Mr. Olympia live. The live stream quality is fine in and of itself, but man, just the backdrop for the stage, it's horrible. It's really horrendous. And then also, I'm not sure if it's just the tanning oil that the competitors are using nowadays, if maybe they used something different back then, or, everyone nowadays, or for the most part, most of the bodybuilders don't seem to be as conditioned. And it just seems like they're holding a film of water outside of like Derek from the back, at least, not from the front, as we all know, but, and then Nick and Hottie and, well, now Martin and Behruz was looking really conditioned at the most recent show. But, it's just something about this lighting really seemed to bring out the detail. And obviously, so Jay Cutler is my favorite bodybuilder of all time. And I got to meet him recently at the 2024 Arnold Classic, which was amazing. But, man, 2009 was really crazy. And honestly, I think Dexter could have won it. But no, I think Jay really did come back with a revamped physique from 08. But Branch looked crazy too, obviously the lower body, but I think Dexter really improved on 2008. Like, not a lot of significant changes, but just bringing the exact same package, but just more refined. And he's, Dexter's always full and cut. So now coming in at number 9, I had the 2006 Austrian Grand Prix. And now this might be a lesser known show for most of you guys, but this is one of the first shows where Jay Cutler was the reigning Mr. Olympia. And this is, the European tour that happens right after the Olympia, towards the end of the year. Ronnie was at this show too, and he placed second to Jay, same placement at the Olympia. But I really liked this show because it was carrying on from the Olympia, Jay keeping his momentum. And honestly, I think that this is one of Jay's most underrated packages. Obviously, just like the 2006 Olympia, he wasn't the most conditioned, and the lighting here was worse than at the Olympia. But, he was full. He was huge. You could argue that he was just outmassing Ronnie in a lot of shots, at least in the upper body. But, yeah, this show, very underrated. It's really hard to find footage from it. I've only seen a few clips, but just from the competitors listed and just the physiques that were brought, I really do like this show. Coming in at number 8, we got the 2006 Mr. Olympia. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the last show. Very similar, but just a deeper competitor pool, obviously, because not everyone at the Olympia will go on to do the European tour, because it's not required. But I think that Ronnie looked better here than at the Austrian Grand Prix. And I think Jay, because of the lighting, looked more conditioned here, although I think that the conditioning was actually pretty similar between both versions. Dexter here was a beast. Victor Martinez really looked good here. This is one of the last rules, I already kind of gave it away there, but one of the last years that Marcus Rule happened to look pretty good. His chest was beginning to deteriorate at this point. Wasn't sure. I'm not sure if he tore it or something, but just the middle area of his chest just became a sinkhole, almost like he had pectus. But yeah, the 2006 Mr. Olympia, one of my favorite shows ever. Coming in at number 7, I have the 2000 Arnold Classic. And I couldn't really find the best photos of Flex and Chris from this. Kevin looked pretty good, but really, when I think of head-to-head matchups, one of the first things that does come to mind, just from one specific show, not counting rivalries, late 90s and early 2000s, Flex versus Chris Cormier. I mean, they trained together, so they were, friends, but also they had a rivalry on stage because when Flex would hop on stage, he would go from, Ken Wheeler to Flex Wheeler, switching that killer mode, as he would say. But, I mean, the physiques that they brought to this show, really something else. And I think out of all the Arnold Classics that, Chris Cormier placed second at, I believe it was 6, I'd say that the package he brought at the 2000 Arnold Classic, I mean, I think that he could have beaten Flex. It's close, but it just depends. I'm not a judge, so I don't know what their criteria is, especially, in this era, but they both looked phenomenal. And, Kevin looked pretty good too, but, this is getting to the point where his leg size started to deteriorate a little bit. But, obviously upper body looks good. But I don't think that Kevin was as conditioned as, definitely Chris. But, Flex, due to his kidney problems and, some other problems, he tended to store more water in his hams and glutes. And if the synthol accusations are true, which they very well might be, that might explain why his arms looked a little smoother, than earlier on in his career. But, I mean, hey, if he was injecting synthol, he was doing it right because he's keeping that detail for the most part. Number 6, I have the 1996 Arnold Classic. This is another one of those head-to-heads that I really, it really pops into my mind when I'm thinking about him. Flex versus Kevin. I'd say that this was their most competitive, best matchup because Flex placed second, and then he went on to win his second Arnold the next year, following year in 97, against Nasser. But Kevin placed first, winning his second and last Arnold Classic. But man, they both looked great at this show, especially in the side shots. They just looked like total beasts. And this is when Flex really started to pick back up and getting more momentum because, after the 93 Arnold and 93 Olympia, he kind of fell off a little bit, not like the quality of physique that he was bringing, but more so just he didn't have a whole lot of wins and the momentum just wasn't there. And obviously at the Olympias, he wasn't placing that high. But once you got to 97, he started winning his Arnolds again, 97, 98, and he wanted to get in 2000. But also 98 and 99 Olympias and 2000 Olympia where he placed third, of course. The momentum picked back up. But this was really, I guess, the last time that you could say, other than maybe the British Grand Prix in 99, which we'll see later on this list, where Flex and Kevin went head-to-head and really, put on a show. The footage from this show is it's surprisingly high quality for the time. But I really like this. It was a pretty deep lineup. You had Vince Taylor there, Paul Dillette, just looking like an absolute monster, almost like in a different weight class. But, yeah, this show, really something else. Number 5, I have the 2024 New York Pro. This is the most recent show on the list. And, I think the lighting, not just the lighting, but also the tan that these competitors had, on point. This was, I'd say, some of the best lighting to date, along with the Detroit Pro of 2024. I mean, the lighting at both these events was just out of this world. Crazy. And I think that the main reason for that being is that the arenas, the stages that they're on are significantly smaller than something like an Arnold or Olympia. And I don't know the exact science behind it, but I'm figuring that smaller sized room, it'll just make lighting easier and more effective. And not just that, I mean, the top 2 guys, Nick, who's one of my favorite bodybuilders ever, and Martin, who's one of my favorite up-and-coming bodybuilders. Dude, both of them were conditioned. They were peeled, sliced and diced, and it was great just seeing Nick back on stage and, not at a guest posing. It was really something, and I think it could have gone either way between Martin and Nick. And I think one of the videos I'm going to be doing is going to be doing a comparison between them just to, voice my thoughts on it. Maybe even do a comparison between Martin at the 2024 Detroit Pro versus his New York Pro variation. I think that could be interesting, but we'll see. We're getting close to the end here, but at fourth, I had the 1999 British Grand Prix. Now, for a lot of people, this show might be number one. And I concur that, it is a phenomenal show, but I think it really was just the lighting, the stage, and obviously a lot of the most iconic photos from the show are in black and white, so that brings out the detail and the contrast significantly more than the actual, how they actually looked on stage. But the top three, you could argue that they're the three most genetically blessed bodybuilders ever, although, you can throw in Phil Heath in there, Paul Ouellette if you want, Sergio Oliva. But, man, just the bodies that were up on this stage to all be there and to all be on at that. Flex, I remember him saying in some interview that he looks back at this show and he thinks that this was his best version. I'm not sure if he still feels like that, but he was like, I had striated glutes, and, well, I don't think he had striated glutes. I think he was exaggerating on that, but, man, he was peeled. Just crazy, out of his mind. But Ronnie just looked like from another world. And again, Kevin placed third behind them, but he looked world-class as well. This was one of his biggest, this might actually be his biggest onstage version. But, man, also Dexter Jackson, this is one of his first pro shows, and he really showed out. He looked good. And I'm trying to think who else was there. Milos was there. Milos looked pretty good, and some of these photos has Milos in them, but he's cut off. But this show, the quality that was brought, probably the most iconic show outside of any Olympia or Arnold Classic. Now we are at the top three. The 2012 Mr. Olympia. This is the second Olympia I ever watched. This was not live, as I was too young, but the battle between the top two at this Olympia, I'd say it's my second favorite battle ever. Kai had to downsize for this show in order to match Phil on his conditioning. That was the goal, and as a result, Kai had to lose some size because Kai's skin isn't as naturally thin as Phil's. Kai's a thicker skinned competitor. So in order for him to match Phil on conditioning, he had to downsize a little bit. And that made things really interesting because now they're about even in size and they're about even in conditioning. And it really just came down to shape, insertion, skeletal structure, just genetics. And that's why Phil prevailed in the end. Coming in second place, we have a very similar show to 2012. The 2010 Arnold Classic. This show, it's getting more notoriety now from a lot of clips that are circulating on Instagram, but Phil and Kai, this is when their rivalry really started and it kicked off in their first major battle on stage. This was something else. Watching, if you go back and you can look on YouTube, watching the pre-judging footage from this, the energy was insane. And the entire top four was insane. Dexter was practically perfect and flawless in every way. Branch's lower body was out of this world. It blew Kai's and Phil's out of the water. And Branch, from the back, his back was probably at its all-time best here, to the point where he was, well, getting the edge in the back shots over, well, at least in the rear lat, over both Kai and Phil at this younger point in their careers. But the top four, I mean, all of them, just perfect physiques. And to cap off my first video, to cap this video off at number one, first place, we have the 2017 Mr. Olympia. And this might come as a shock. Some of you might be asking, well, why is this your favorite? You could argue that the quality was worse, the lighting was worse than a lot of these other shows. The depth of the competition was worse. Phil's bubble gut, obviously. You could argue that the overall conditioning on stage was worse than shows from past years. But, man, this was the first Olympia I ever watched live and just in general. But this is something that really got me into bodybuilding. And I guess it could be the nostalgia factor, but also, apart from those head-to-head matchups with Phil and Kai in 2012 and 2010 from the last two entries, Phil versus Rami at this Olympia, it was something else. I was blown away, but I was blown away equally by both of them because, I mean, their physiques, they're about the same height. I'd say Rami was a little taller, or maybe just Phil squatted down more in his posing, which, I mean, he probably did. But they were really similar, but also different, Rami doesn't have the best abs, but his abs in midsection were clearly better than Phil's. And, well, Rami's quads are out of this world, but so are Phil's. And Phil has, I'd say, probably the thickest adductors of all time, and those are the groin muscles, either him or Branch Warren. So from side to side, in terms of size in the front shots, he was matching Rami. At least it seemed like that, And both of them, and obviously Phil is rounder than Rami, and his insertions are, he's more he's genetically gifted in that sense, more so than Rami. But Rami, he had the width factor, and in that rear lat, it really showed how different they were. How in Phil's rear lat, he wasn't dominating through his skeletal structure or immense width because he didn't have those in spades. He was dominating just through thickness and detail. And then Rami was the opposite because, yeah, he had a thick and pretty detailed back this year, but he's just so wide. His skeletal structure is just one of a kind, really. I mean, to be at that height and to have that clavicle width that would make, someone like, well, let's say Paul Dillette, who's 6'2", and had broad clavicles proportional to his height. And Rami's clavicles are just leagues wider. It was just crazy, the stage presence that Rami had. And not just that, I don't have a photo of it on here, but William Bonac, who placed third at this event, that's one of my favorite physiques of all time. That's prime Bonac. And he's like a mini Phil in a sense. He's very bubbly and round. He has that pop. And I do think that the lighting was, out of all the Olympias in the mid-2010s to late 2010s, I think that the lighting at this show was the best. It was pretty good. And also, I think that the top three were just razor sharp, uber conditioned. But this is probably my favorite top three out of any show ever. And that's why it's my number one. So thank you guys for watching. Many more videos to come. Who knows, maybe I'll be able to profit from this, but even if I don't, hey, it's just fun. And this is Fawn signing out.